Hello and welcome to today's webinar on due diligence for private company acquisitions, a bite-sized guide. My name's Jackie Sheldon. It's lovely to have you with me for today's webinar. I was a corporate solicitor in practice. I worked and trained at Taylor Wessing in London in their projects department, working on mergers and acquisitions. I moved to the Northwest and I was at Pannoni's and Hammonds in the Northwest, again, specialising in mergers and acquisitions, which is why that you've got me for today's due diligence webinar. I was in practice for 10 years. I left practice. I moved to teach. I'm qualified to teach up to master's level. I've been teaching now for 17 years, but I only teach the areas that I specialised in. So let's start off looking at what we're going to be covering in today's short webinar. Now, the focus for today's webinar is key practical points for consideration when you're looking at both corporate and commercial due diligence for a private company acquisition. Now, the starting point to appreciate is the due diligence is usually a job for the buyer. So we're talking about buyer due diligence today. And it is essential for the buyer because it goes back to that Latin maxim that you can see on the slide, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. And it applies equally to the purchase of shares or the purchase of a business as a going concern. But essentially, the buyer is either buying the whole target, including any hidden liabilities in that target, or they're buying the business as a going concern. And the buyer is going to have very specific worries. They want to know, are they buying what they think they're buying, and will they get proper title to the assets that they're purchasing? So the briefing means that you are fully armed and able to deal with everything in a really calm and structured manner, and it takes a lot of the risk and the worry out of due diligence. So as a junior, if you are carrying out due diligence, don't be frightened to ask these questions, because actually that means you are much more prepared and will be able to carry out a much better job. Okay, so now let's talk about the actual process of the due diligence. Now, usually the buyer will send a due diligence questionnaire to the seller. And the more tailored your questionnaire is to the target or the business that's being sold, the better the responses will be. So just sending out a standard due diligence questionnaire will not net you the best responses. So the more you can tailor your questionnaire, the better. And you should be working with the buyer to make sure you're asking the most important questions.